my phone.
How are you, Abby?
I'm good. How are you?
All good, all good.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Super. With
Great.
my extraterrestrial device, I can hear you from here to Philadelphia. Let me do a little introduction to whoever's listening, and then we'll go in English.
Great.
Bueno, hola a todos. Es viernes. El día de hoy quise invitar a Abby Bysshe, que es una buena amiga y tiene una trayectoria muy interesante coordinando exposiciones de arte, especialmente fotografía, durante muchos años, 15 años de trabajo en museos y para la revista National Geographic. Nos conocimos en Fotofest en Querétaro y me parece que es una persona súper interesante porque toda su vida ha estado involucrada con la fotografía. A ella le gusta mucho la fotografía, su papá es fotógrafo. Vamos a hacer la entrevista en inglés, así que a practicar un poco. So, Abby, you're okay?
Yes.
Life is good.
I'm great. How are you? Good to see you.
Is the museum working right now? I mean, it's closed, obviously, but are you working from home?
Yes, working from home. We're all working from home.
You're doing all the reservations for your future traveling.
Yes. I'm listening to white noise in the background of the airport to remind me of traveling.
All right. So, Abby, you've been working nearly 15 years for either museums or for a big magazine like National Geographic, coordinating exhibits. Exactly what is I mean, I know it's probably very different working in a museum and working in a magazine. It's kind of being in opposite teams, you know. But what exactly is your job like now at the Franklin Institute?
So my job now, it's kind of the opposite of what I was doing at National Geographic. So at National Geographic, I spent all my time trying to get content and photography into museums. And now I'm on the other side of that at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. It's a science center, so it's much more hands-on, interactive. So I spend time bringing traveling exhibitions to the museum. So I'm working with a lot of companies to try and get the most fun and coolest stuff kind of into the museum. And on top of that, kind of designing and working with my team on the exhibits that are permanent in the museum as well.
So it's pretty cool because you know both, you know the answers and the questions for both sides, no?
I've done the sales part and I do the buying part.
So 7 years at the National Gallery of Art, which, as far as I understand, it was big art collections, probably big important ones in Washington, D.C., and then now at the Franklin Institute, which is more science and technology.
Yes.
And in between National Geographic, it was about a big thing about photography and about storytelling. How is different between working with art, promoting science and technology, or photography? Do you have to change your mindset on how you approach your clients or how you receive your clients?
It's so exhibits in each of those are very different. In common, it's all about good storytelling, no matter what museum you're in. But with an art museum, we did a lot more. When it came to photography, we did a lot more retrospectives. So photographers that have had long careers, showcasing all of their work over multiple years. And the National Gallery of Art tended to showcase artists that were no longer living. They weren't as modern as some art museums are. And then when I was at National Geographic, that was just a lot of fun. It was just a lot more current. You were working directly out of the magazine. You had access to all these great assets and stories and people. So it was much more reactive to the great stuff that was coming out of the magazine and what we were able to do from an exhibit standpoint. And now with the Science Center, it's a very different mindset in how you kind of design exhibits. You're really thinking about how to get your visitor to interact with the people in the museum and touch things. It's very different than an art museum where they don't want you to touch anything. You're just kind of walking around and looking. The Franklin Institute actively encourages, you know, hands-on, running around, pulling levers, pushing buttons, interacting with other people. So it's a very different exhibit design and a very different volume and vibe in those different museums.
For a lot of children too, no?
Yeah.
I know you're super passionate about art, and probably every stage of your career, these three last jobs have been very interesting, and for you, probably the you know, working wise so exciting and demanding. But do you miss National Geographic, like hanging around photography? Because I know Stanley, your dad, he's a very avid photographer, and you like photography. Do you miss that, or just art or technology just fills your heart the same way?
Yeah, the museum that I'm in now has a lot of different challenges, and I really enjoy it, but photography will always be my passion. When I go to a museum, the things that I like to see are always art and photography. That's just my personal passion. But I really like the storytelling that are in science centers. But I've been taking pictures since I was 12. I mean, photography is just something that I've always been attracted to and passionate about. And I continue to be, even though it's not a big part of my everyday job anymore.
And Abby, how well, I'm sure, I know that you still travel a lot and probably for the National Art Gallery was the same, Gallery of Art was the same thing, but when you were at National Geographic, you were traveling quite a bit. You were going a lot to Europe. How important was that exposure to go to all these museums and to see all these artists, to open up your mind in regarding how you understood it, you know?
It's interesting because when I started my career at the National Gallery, that museum is very closed off. They are very old. They've been around a long time. They are not spending a lot of time learning what other museums are doing. They're free to the public, so there's not a lot of incentive to really understand the broader museum community. So when I started at National Geographic, it was just this eye-opening experience to go to various museum conferences and travel to all of these museums, both small and large, international and national. And it really kind of sparked my true love for the museum business and how diverse and wonderful museums are. And that's something that I've been able to continue in this job. I think it's the career that I've really kind of built, is understanding the various museum businesses around the world. Hi, Ricky.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of people logging in and out. I'm sure some people in Spanish will, man, yeah, some of your fans already claiming you. At the end, I will leave like the last 5 minutes if you have any questions for Abby about, you know, we're going to try to focus the conversation a little bit into photography. In the last 20 years, we changed from film to digital. Many years ago, each photographer, whenever they make a very special photograph, that photograph lasted for a long time. You know, we go to Steve McCurry's super famous portrait of this Afghan girl was made in 1984, and still an image that's kind of suspended in time, you know. Now, digital maybe not changed that necessarily, but the social media has. Pictures just come and go, you know, they disappear in a few minutes. You think that's gonna change the power of photography, the speech of photography as an art form?
I think it raises the bar for the quality of photography because there's so much visual noise. In the digital world, you're seeing so many things. I think you have to work extra hard as a photographer to create that image that's going to get people to stop long enough to notice. So I think that's where the digital landscape has changed photography. I think once you bring photography into the museum setting, you're forcing people to slow down automatically because of where they are. So I think in the museum context, it's still the same, but I think online you're just bombarded. And I think it's also creating a culture of people that have a higher expectation for the visual art. I mean, you're just seeing it all the time. I think you recognize, even as a layperson, what a good photograph is.
And now, how about back in the days for a photographer, because photography is being considered for many people an art, for some maybe it's not. But compared to the great painters, you know, I'm sure museums would rather have a famous painting than a famous photograph. But there are some really famous photographers that have exhibited their work in some of the best museums in the world. Now, a professional photographer with a good career may be not so important compared to a 20-year-old guy or girl that has a very hot Instagram account. And this has changed the platform where people display their photos. Magazines have lost their power, you know, social media has taken over. And for a lot of companies and for the industry is giving up their souls to these influencers, you know. As a museum, would you open the doors to say, okay, we have this kid, he's 20 years old, he has 3 million followers, we want to have an exhibit about his work, even if he's never published a picture or never sold a picture, but he's just very important in the social media?
That's an interesting question. I guess it depends on the museum. I don't see long-standing art museums doing that, but also museums have changed as well. So there's lots of pop-up. Instagram is a perfect example of that. They do pop-up exhibitions kind of all over the place. So the term museum doesn't necessarily fit into the four walls of a couple 100-year-old building anymore either. So I think not only are there more platforms online to showcase content, there are more delivery mechanisms from an exhibition standpoint. So I think if the story is good and the quality of the imagery is good, then there may be a museum out there that would showcase something like that, but they're not going to showcase it just because the person happens to have a lot of followers. That's not what is driving the curatorial decisions that happen in museums.
So if this is the case, you know, like Edward Weston or some of these amazing photographers from the United States that are considered now American artists, and they probably their work has been displayed in many museums. These guys now may be popular, but if they are not included in the museum, will they not be recognized as artists at some point? They will just go, because we don't know what will happen with social media, but you know, as I said at the beginning, Ansel Adams is still here forever, you know. Everybody listening to photography knows all these great American photographers, but now some of these guys is just 10 million, you know, followers, but you don't even remember the name. They don't even use their name. You know, they might use will they never be recognized as artists because they'll disappear, or?
It's a tough question, because I think the way that art is defined right now, that definition is held by museums and galleries, and a larger kind of institution of like selling art. So the value of art means something. So how much is it worth to purchase? How much is it worth to hold in a collection? So yeah, there is a concern that a lot, because of the digital era and the longevity of a JPEG or however you're saving your files on your phone, doesn't have a permanence. It's not forever. Unlike a museum. I mean, museums collect things, so I'm not quite sure, because I've been out of the art museum world for a while, how they are dealing with the digital age. I know National Geographic has a huge digital catalog, so they're fine. All of that stuff will last forever. They have 11 million images in their collection, and they continue to collect everything that goes through that magazine. I'm not quite sure if photography museums specifically are dealing with digital content in the same way. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. how important you think is for a photographer to define a style? And I will use Annie Leibovitz, who to me is one of the great American photographers of this time. And she claims to be not a technical photographer, but her style is amazing. Do you think now because before Ansel Adams and all these photographers were super technical, and that's what impressed the world, you know, their technical ability to create perfect images. Now, maybe we're not in a technical world, but so it's all about style, do you think, to become popular or important as an artist or photographer?
Yes, because I think everybody has access to the technology now. It's a lot easier for more people to have technical abilities. I think it's not just style, it's your personal voice that you bring to your work. I think it's really easy to tell a great photographer and the uniqueness of the way that they present their material. You can almost see it instantaneously, and you can also catch a photographer that's copying someone they've seen before or a style that they've seen before. So I think, yeah, style and your voice, the way you are visually telling your stories, what your point of view is, the kind of material that you're capturing. Is it personal to you? Is it about where you live? Is it your personal story? I think those are the things that really rise to the top for content right now.
Which is the best photo exhibit you ever seen in your life? Do you have one in particular you say, well, this was amazing?
I don't know that I have one. I don't know that I have one. Actually, this was when I was at the National Gallery of Art, they did a William Penn exhibition of his work, which was stunning. There's just something about the richness of his portraits that are really striking. And he comes from a magazine background, so it was a lot of Vogue, but he approached fashion photography in such a unique and amazing way. That exhibit's always really stood out to me. I also saw Salgado's work the last time I was in Italy, which, you know, his stuff is stunning. So,
but you probably have seen quite a few good ones, no?
I have seen a lot of good ones, yeah. It would take me a while to remember them all and remember which ones I loved.
Now think about it, because maybe Ricardo Sarkozy is crying right now. His heart is.
Yes, well, of course, Ricky, all the ones that put them. That's a given.
Okay, tell me your 3 favorite museums of all time. What do you think, if you're into art, 3 museums around the world that people must see?
So my favorite, God, these are such hard questions for each.
Come on, so, I told you, you have to have a.
You're asking me both sides. So my favorite art museum in the U.S. is the Cleveland Museum of Art in Cleveland, Ohio. Right. It has a really diverse collection. I just think they do an amazing job of presenting their work. It's a lot of specifically American art. I think they just do a really great job. Let's see. Bellas Artes in Mexico City.
Right.
Hands down. Those murals are incredible. They're incredible. It's, you know, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in any other museum. And then if I were to pick an international one, there's a really huge museum in Munich, Germany called the Deutsches Museum. It's one of the oldest science and technology museums in the world, and it's actually what the Franklin Institute was based off of. But it's just, I think I walked 9 miles
Really?
when I was there. It took me the whole day just wandering around, but they have huge machinery. It's the whole exhibit, the whole museum was based on opening up machines and seeing how they work. So they have planes and boats and trains, and it's just a really cool museum.
Talking about the U.S. and obviously you are an American, do you think that the American history of the American photography scene has been influential to the rest of the world? You think that's a trendsetter? What happens in the United States goes to the world?
I think it's been a back and forth. So if you look at the turn of the century photography in the U.S., so you look at a Paul Strand or an Alfred Stieglitz, they were very influenced by European modern artists. So they were getting their technique and their style seeing art, because there wasn't a lot of photography to see at that point. Yeah, and I think from there was there was the sharing of that and an influence of that, but I've really seen art in general just works back and forth. You're always influenced by something, and even now as the world becomes more connected, it's easier to kind of have that fluid creativity between the genres. So I think most early photographers were influenced by European art because that was the creative venue of the day. Like modern art was a brand new thing that wasn't actually very prominent in the United States. They were still very traditional in their art style, and most of the kind of early photographers were taking their cues from Europe. So,
and for you, which are the three most influential photographers of the United States history?
Oh,
come on. Well, I mean, it's for you. It doesn't have to be. If you go to Wikipedia, Steve McCurry comes in first place, and I don't know if that's true.
Well, so I wrote full disclosure, I wrote my graduate thesis on Alfred Stieglitz, so he's always been my favorite. I think what he brought to the world of art, just bringing artists into his kind of collaborative and being a champion for art, but also being an amazing photographer, I would put him very high on that list. Paul Strand has always been a favorite of mine. He was the same era, but much more abstract in his approach. I mean, I think you would have to look at like the WPA photographers in the U.S.
Think about that. Think the last one because I saw Stanley joining the chat.
Figured out how to use Instagram Live.
I told him.
I think those would be mine, just off the top of my head.
Well, you said you've been to Bellas Artes. Which other? You've come quite a bit to Mexico, and I know you like it. Which other museums do you recommend? You see, there's your mom. Who's Santa Bysshe? You see, that's Stanley right there.
You gotta have supportive parents, right?
Oh, my mom is connected too.
So yeah, I've been to most of the museums in Mexico City, in El Centro right there. I'm trying to think of off the top of my head. Is it the Sotomayor? Am I pronouncing that correctly? That really cool, silver building. And then the rest of my time in Mexico has been in Merida and Querétaro, so I'm a big fan of the galleries in Querétaro. They don't have big traditional museums as much as kind of smaller museum galleries, but they've got some great stuff.
Okay. In the last few years, do you think that the freedom of expression in photography has gone out of control? Is it cool what's happening now with the telephones? Do you think the telephone, well, that's another question, but the freedom of expression, do you think it's a positive thing towards the image world? Or it's just a little bit out of control now, like you said, almost garbage?
I think the wonderful thing about photography right now is there are more diverse people that can tell stories. I think photography for a really long time was a white male dominated profession, and you actually had to have kind of a bit of wealth to be able to travel and be a photographer and have that as a career. You had to have some sort of financial backing to be able to do that and make a living. I think the accessibility of photography and the multiple platforms for it has just really broadened the diversity of stories, and we're seeing cultures and points of view that we never got to see before.
And yet there have been some American female photographers that are really renowned, George O'Keeffe and Dorothea Lange, and there have been quite a few, even if it's, like you say, it's been dominated by men. What do you think now of so many women being even more successful than a lot of men?
I love it. I mean, again, I think it's about the perspective from which stories are being told. I think women, you look at Alinzia Dario, women have access to places and stories that men do not. So you're really seeing this amazing diversity. The work that she does is incredible. And there's a laundry list of women who kind of fall into that. You know, there were some great ones at National Geographic, just a pleasure to work with every single one of them. But I think those are stories that are being told that can't really be told by anybody else. And I think that's true of a lot of things.
Okay, so let's go back to the telephone. What's going on with the telephone? Do you like it? Is it, I mean, is it good? People are creating so many. I think Sebastián Salgado was the one that said that telephones don't make pictures, they create images, you know, yeah. And you take a picture, you create a picture with a camera. To me, the telephone has been like a cancer to the photography industry, you know, because you know you see the companies are not selling as many cameras before, and they didn't react to connectivity, which was what people wanted 10 years ago. But
yeah, I can speak for myself in that I think the phones made me a super lazy photographer. It took me a while to get a digital camera, and and it also took me even longer to get a smartphone. But when I did, and the cameras became so good, because I travel a lot sometimes, I travel by myself a lot. I always feel sort of uncomfortable carrying a large camera with me, just as a tourist in some of the places that I go. And having a phone is just such a natural extension of yourself. It's easier to take pictures and document. It's just a little bit more discreet. I actually just kind of downsized my camera because I wanted something that was a little bit more travel friendly and lighter and a little less conspicuous. So it's so much easier to take a picture on your phone, process it on an app in 2 seconds, and put a great picture on Instagram. There's an instant gratification there that you still don't get if you're even with a digital camera, unless you're, you know, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi right into your phone. So yeah, it's tough because it's tough for the industry. It's like most things, it's disrupted the photography industry. It's disrupted photo sales. You can post something online and a company can go, hey, can I repost that? And you say, sure. They don't have to pay for it, and they use your image for their advertising or whatever. So it's really tough, I think, on the industry and photographers. But I don't know that you can, these are the things that happen with technology. So it's kind of hard to control that.
Okay, I'm a photographer starting out my career. I've never exhibited my work. What would you, obviously you're not gonna open your office for them, but yeah. For me, you're not gonna give me an appointment, but for the people that is just super happy with the pictures they're creating, they want to have a photo exhibit, what would you recommend? From, obviously, as I say, you are on the big leagues, but
I think a great place to start are photo festivals. I've seen more and more photo festivals opening up exhibits and curating work from not known photographers. So opening up channels before the exhibition. Photo Fest does it really well. Opening up, you know, a submission process before and really showcasing a broad range of photographers. So I think those are the first places that I think I would go if I had really good work to showcase, or even going to a festival with your work and talking to the photographers that are there and getting feedback and opening up those networks. That's kind of the entry point that I would suggest.
Well, I'm going to go to a personal question towards the end about your photography dream. But is it really tough to become a, I mean, I never met your dad, but I was probably 5 meters away from him in Yellowstone, and you know, his pictures are fantastic. Is it really difficult to make a living out of photography in the United States?
I always thought so, that's why I didn't do it.
and you didn't want to carry your camera, so I already had two. Camera's
too heavy, seemed like a lot of work. No, I think I think after working at National Geographic, I would say yes, it's hard. It's hard to get recognized. There are, like most things in the US, very few places that you can showcase your work. So it's, you know, newspapers, magazines, and those are all long-standing institutions that usually have a lot of pre-existing relationships with photographers. It's just a hard group to kind of crack into. I think it's gotten easier because it's easier to get noticed, but I think it's still really tough to kind of. I think you could probably make a living, but if you want to be super recognized, I think that's hard.
5, 6 years ago, I was in Philadelphia with my son. We saw you. He did a little interview for his school project, and at that moment, you just were leaving National Geographic because of this, which I didn't know until I spoke to Virgilio. Now National Geographic belongs to Disney. I didn't know that. But at that moment was Fox Studios. They purchased the company, and there was a big switch in the photographers lineup. You know, like for me, the big names. Virgilio said that he doesn't think that way, but for me, I think they just kind of moved out. They were released from the company. And to me now seems like there are a lot of younger photographers working for the magazine. Obviously, they are all really, really nice photographers, but is the same impact? For me, I've heard a lot of people there are not so, like National Geographic has been a magazine that always, people say photography. It's not about, because it's only amazing stories, wonderful writers that have and contributors and, you know, researchers, but the magazine will always be known for the photography. And I think that lately a lot of people feel that the quality of photography is dropped a little bit. I mean, still all of them are amazing photographers. I'm not saying no, but it feels like it dropped a notch.
It's interesting because at some point, just from an audience perspective, so National Geographic, most magazines struggle like any publication where at some point you need to start attracting younger audiences to be part of your brand. And I think that brand skewed a little bit older for so long because it was traditionalist in a lot of ways. And I think they were trying to make a move, one, to a more digital focused distribution, which meant having more photographers, being quicker with the stories, so not taking, you know, a year, 2 years all the time. Sometimes it's only a couple of weeks. But yeah, I have seen the shift into a lot of younger photographers. I think it's intentional in that they're trying to broaden their voice a little bit so that their consumer base broadens, so that they're talking to a more diverse group of people. I haven't been. You know, I have my favorite National Geographic photographers, and I really love, yes, natural history photography. It's always been one of my favorites. So I don't necessarily connect with more cultural or what's the word, like crisis kind of photography as much. But yeah, I mean, I think all brands have to open up and change it up a little bit. You can't just keep using the same photo. And I think those photographers, they have great photo editors there, so they'll continue to improve and those stories will get better. And then they'll become the photographers you're used to seeing. And so I think at some point they had to shift into a younger group.
It's just, don't get me wrong, I think some of the people that you see in the magazine now are still doing amazing things. But for me, growing up and looking at David Duvillette picture on the water with film, and you imagine how this guy made this picture at 40 meters below the surface. That was amazing. It was totally amazing, and many photographers. And now with so much post-production, my feeling is that now there's post-production involved, which it was supposed not to be possible in a magazine like this, and now you see the pictures and you say, come on. And so it's part of life. It's okay for me, but I know you're getting a little red, so I won't go.
Oh no, I don't have an answer. I haven't worked there in 5 years, so maybe.
Okay, I'm gonna go with a few fast questions. You have only 2 possible answers. You have to say one.
Okay.
No explaining necessary.
All right.
Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia?
Philadelphia.
All right.
No question.
Digital or film?
Film.
35 millimeter lens or 50 millimeter lens?
50.
And which is your favorite lens? If you get to choose one.
I was a Nikon girl for a long time.
So what does that mean?
I like a good classic zoom lens.
All right.
1855 zoom.
So I just know that the third calamity why you didn't become a photographer. You're Nikon. You should be Canon.
I know. It was from the beginning.
Okay. Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
Really?
Sunrise is too early.
Really?
Yeah.
It's too early. Okay. Flash or natural light?
Natural light.
Okay. Black and white or color?
Black and white.
Okay. This one is very important for your well-being in Pennsylvania. Eugene Smith or Steve McCurry? They're both from Pennsylvania.
Say that one more time.
Eugene Smith or Steve McCurry?
Eugene Smith.
Woohoo! Very good. Dorothea Lange or Vivian Maier? They're not, I mean, they're 30 years from each other, but.
Vivian Maier.
All right. Holbox or Curaçao?
Oh, come on.
Your mom is right there.
Curacao. It's gotta be Curacao.
Okay. Well, you've been working for many years in the museums and National Geographic, coordinating all these photo exhibits. As I said, your dad is big into photography. You told me it was your big dream. Time has come to answer why you didn't go into photography. I already know you didn't want to carry a camera and you have a Nikon.
It was stacked against me. I did all the things when I was in high school and college. I even did a photojournalism camp when I was in college. I just enjoy photography as a hobby. It was always a passion of mine, something I enjoyed doing, and I didn't want to ruin that by making it a career. And it seemed at the time, in the early 2000s, that it was a lot of work and really hard to get into photography as a career. And I loved museums, and I found a way to photography without actually having to be a professional photographer. And I think the direction I went in made more sense for me.
Really? If you could change that, would you go into photography now? After all those lovely meetings you have on Friday night with your boss.
I still don't think so, because I really enjoy the diversity of photography that you get to see working in a museum. I've just had such a wonderful experience working with a variety of photographers and seeing so much art and so much photography. I just think I'm better on that side of the lens.
Well, I told you Stan was connected, and your mom saying Stan says Sony.
He was a Nikon shooter, and he just switched to Sony because it's lighter. It's okay. I switched to Fuji. So.
It's okay. Nobody's perfect.
No, I can't let them.
If all of a sudden right now you were able to say, okay, I've been in a museum, I've seen all the art in the world, I'm happy, and I ate all the Philly steaks. One of those sandwiches. Okay, I'm done with that. You could become a professional photographer right now. What type of photography will you do?
I think landscape. I mostly because of where it would put me with the places that I would get to go. I think landscape photography would be what I would want to do. because I can imagine myself in like you know, Airstream, kind of Winnebago, in the middle of nowhere by myself with a camera with a huge landscape in front of me and being very happy.
How do you see the future of photography, Abby?
Well, I hope cameras never go away. I don't think they will. I think there's always going to be professional photographers versus amateur. I'm just hoping we continue to give people with unique stories more of a voice. I think there's still some work to be done in the magazine world and the publishing world to kind of get that diversity of voice in there, but I'm just hoping that kind of grows and continues into the future.
But do you think the magazines still, you know, going to be out there for? I mean, a lot of magazines are really struggling now. Will they be out there 2 years, 3 years? Difficult to know, no?
I don't know, especially after these last couple of months, like the amount of digital content and digital that's happening. I don't know what's going to happen with newspapers and magazines. But, you know, we've been saying that for a decade and they still seem to be hanging on. So I'm not sure. There will be an end to that, I think, at some point. I think the publishing industry is not forever. But I think things like National Geographic will still have online platforms to publish their work. So it'll exist in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. You've been quite a bit to Mexico and probably to a few other countries in Latin America. Do you think that there's talent big enough to be worldwide known? You know, like you said before, in the United States it's difficult to make it, but once you make it, you become a worldwide, not a celebrity, a worldwide known photographer. And
Yep.
in Latin America, it's much more difficult because we are not, you know, you become a famous photographer in Mexico, you're just a famous photographer in Mexico. But you've been exposed to a lot of people here. You've given lectures. You spent quite a few time with Ricardo and his events, and you've come on your own, and you've probably been to other countries. Do you think there's really good talent? It's just difficult because of the economy of these countries, or what do you think it is?
I think there definitely is, and I think again it is about the access to a broader group of people. So I think the reason why Europe and the US kind of dominate the photography world is it always has, but I see those lines blurring a little bit and those walls coming down a little bit, and seeing more photographers from Africa and photographers from Asia and Latin America and South America. So I think, yes, there's definitely talent. I think the access to getting out of the country or having a more worldwide presence has been limited, but that doesn't mean that the talent isn't there. And I think the more digital platforms that are out there and the more that photography grows a little bit more universally, I think that'll become easier.
If you can give a few advices for someone who's trying, and I know you're not an editor, but you've been exposed to an amazing amount of photography collections and stories, and working for National Geographic especially, you got to see some of the best. People have a really hard time to put up a portfolio together. You know, that's just kind of the biggest unknown on how to start. A couple of weeks ago, I had an interview with Virgilio, which you know well, and he said for him it's about 3 stories of about 10 images each on how you tell a story. But for you, coming from a more artsy background, what's important to have a portfolio for the people who are listening right now? It's
the trick of having variety, but a consistent point of view. So you have to feel, when you're looking at pictures, you have to be able to feel your voice and your story in those, but you also have to be able to tell various kinds of stories. So you don't want just one 20 image story of the same thing. You have to come at it from different angles. But you want that genuine and consistency, I think. And that is what is going to stand out. If you have a genuine and unique point of view, that, and you're telling a story no one else really can, that is going to show through. And if you have the technical capabilities, but I always say too, it's very different in magazines than it is like what you look for to make a good exhibit in a museum. But I like things that are, you know, a broad wide angle and things that are closer up, something that's intimate, and you know, you have that kind of push and pull between intimate and far away. Does that make sense? So like a close up of a flower, but a picture of a field, like having that kind of movement in your selection is really good.
Okay. And I forgot to mention, it's the first time I make an interview. I'm not much of a journalist, so making interview, it's already been a challenge in Spanish. But to read it in English, I really have to listen to you, and then I have to go to my computer. But I forgot how important it is for someone who's developing their photography, not necessarily that you want to make a living or you're looking to make a living, but you are, you know, someone that really likes photography. How important it is to go to museums, to see art, not only photography, because I think photography, it's a risk. You might be just a little too contaminated, too into, I want to reproduce this, but to see art.
I think it's very important. I think anytime you are interested in perfecting a craft, you have to be a student of that craft. So I'm a student of museums. Like, museums are my craft. I go to as many as I possibly can, as many exhibits as I possibly can. I read about museums as much as I can. So I think, you know, if you want to become a really great photographer, you need to take in as much artistic, creative information as you possibly can, because that's what's going to help shape your unique point of view. You can't just, creativity usually is coming from the outside in. It's not like you're going to sit at home one day and have this like miraculous vision for what your photography is going to look like. You're going to do it through trial and error and seeing other people's work and getting feedback. So it's a process that you constantly have to work at. And a piece of that is constantly kind of taking in as much art as possible, I think.
Out of that, which I don't want to say century, but which time in the history of the United States that you think has been the richest in the explosion of art or the manifestation?
It depends on what you're interested in. So if you're interested in a more abstract artistic approach, you're looking at the 20s and 30s. If you're looking for more documentary, you're in that WPA era, which I think was the 50s, 40s, 50s. So yeah, it just depends. I mean, I think there's some, I think we have lost the wonders of kind of abstract photography that existed in kind of that turn of the century era, the just looking at things a little bit differently, having your angles be a little bit different, thinking about shadows a little differently. I think we've moved much more into a photojournalistic approach. I don't see as many kind of art photographers, current art photographers anymore. So yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from just those early black and whites. That depth of contrast, the use of shadow and light was kind of incredible, and I think that translates throughout the style of photography.
And why do you think there's not that many art photographers? It's just very difficult to make a living out of that, no?
I think they're probably, maybe I'm just not as tuned in to that as I used to be. I just haven't, I'm thinking like the Cindy Shermans and the Jeff Walls. I mean, there's definitely been some recent ones. I just don't, maybe they're not, maybe the new art photographers aren't cutting through to the museum. It's probably harder as an art photographer than it is as a photojournalist to find a platform for your work. So I'm sure they're out there, I just haven't seen them from an exhibit lens.
Have you done any workshops? I mean, just to try to educate visually. I mean, I know it's not just like your perfect background, but at some point, you know, when you are exposed to all these different aspects of what happens in a museum, of how photo exhibits are set, have you ever thought of doing a workshop to teach people to be more sensitive about, because you're on top of that, you do part of the business of the museums, you know, it's all about money at the end, so you understand a little bit of each part of the game?
I've taught, I've done some classes that are more exhibit design driven and more business and museum driven. Whenever I go to PhotoFest, Ricky always puts me to work, so I usually end up giving a talk or two. I haven't really done anything specifically with photographers about photography exhibits or how to put an exhibit together or portfolios. I mean, I love talking to people and teaching, so I would love to do it. I just haven't had the time for it.
Well, there is Ceci Escandon, who runs the Activa Fotografía here in Mexico. Is one of the, well, Ricardo is he graduated from this school, and maybe they can bring you here to Mexico to do a workshop about.
I mean, I'm not going to turn down and take to Mexico.
Well, normally at the end of the talk, you were so effective and polite and sharp about your answers. Normally, all Latin people talk so much, and so at the end of the hour, I'm just like trying to rescue 1 second here and there to finish. But I don't know if anybody that's listening has a question. I know Stan and Sandra are making some comments, but if
they're not allowed to ask any questions.
Where did you leave the?
Yeah.
The keys.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if anybody has, anyway, another thing that I've been asking everybody is not a challenge, but a little visual exercise. We are at home. We are. For me, being at home is super fun, but some people are a little anxious because they are not used to stay home for that long time. And so everybody's just come up with some ideas for a little visual exercise to do these things. And I wonder if you have one you want to share.
A visual exercise? Well, I can tell you right now that the amount of content that is out there is incredible. I've just been enjoying like watching people's videos with the most creative stuff. Been enjoying. I love creativity in times of boredom. It's just been producing some really great stuff, way funnier than I would ever put together. So yeah, I've been watching a ton of videos online, and I've just been reading a lot. I've had a lot more time to read, so I've been kind of digesting as many articles as possible and getting back to reading some books. So that's how I've been spending well, I've also been working a lot, but I've been spending my time.
I have a couple of questions here. Just sending here. Let me read the first one. Where are Mexican exhibitions compared to American and European exhibitions?
Exhibitions in Mexico museums?
Yeah, well, it's not specified by Ricardo. I guess, yeah, here in Mexico, I don't know, the quality of the setup, the museum.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that's what he meant.
Yeah, I mean, if it's, yeah, they're great. I have not seen a difference between the quality of presentation that happens in museums in Mexico versus anywhere else. I mean, they have incredible collections. I'm always more interested in the more local collections when I'm going to different countries. Like I don't want to have to see like a U.S. artist in a Mexican museum. Like that's not interesting to me. So you know, having the Diego Riveras and the Frida Kahlos and that kind of stuff, being able to tell that local story is why I travel and why I go to museums in other countries. So I think the stuff in Mexico is great.
Okay, here's another question here. And after this epidemic and quarantine ends, would you consider to do more virtual exhibitions? Is that I'm sorry, I've never done this. I'm trying to read the whole question.
I can read it. That was pretty clever what you just did right there. It's this changing moment for exhibitions. Yeah, I'll be interested. This is such I've been thinking about this a lot, and it's tough. For me, I come from a science center, so a virtual exhibition is a very different thing. I think art museums are a lot easier to do kind of virtual tours and virtual exhibitions, and a lot of them are doing them. I think that there will be more, but I don't think that they will ever replace the feeling of being in a museum face to face with art. I think when you're looking at it on a screen, you can get halfway there, but I think that the true emotional feeling of walking into a museum and seeing an exhibit or seeing a piece of art at scale, with the lighting and the quiet and all of that, you just can't produce that digitally. So I think, yes, I think museums will probably spend more time digitizing their collections, getting more content online, which will broaden their audience, people that may never make it through their front doors. But I don't think that it will replace the kind of brick and mortar of a museum.
But it's also the energy of the place, no? It's like going to a big church or going to a football stadium. Even if you don't like football, you know, there's certain energy when you come to a museum. Everybody's trying to absorb, you know, this beauty, even if for us, most people, they don't even know how, but there's a special energy about museums, I think. Yeah. Here's another question.
And there's an element of like sharing, like if you're with somebody and you're sharing that moment with them, like that doesn't happen on your phone.
Yeah. Okay, here's a couple of questions. Has this forced grounding changed the thoughts about exploring your own environment versus the outside world? This is kind of, I don't know if I understood the question.
I can't see it. What was that?
Has this forced grounding changed your thoughts about exploring your own environment versus the outside world?
Oh, no. It's the most of the time I've spent in my apartment in a really long time. I mean, I've been exploring the city more. I can't really walk around a ton here. We have a stay-at-home order in Philadelphia, so they're not really encouraging a lot of wandering about outside of your living space. But in the places that I can walk, it's been nice to like be in the city and just be here. I'm a little stir crazy in this apartment, though. I mean, it's not my ideal.
Come on. You run at 4 o'clock in the morning, do the Rocky Balboa run every morning, and then you go home. Another question is, what is the best way to get to the ice to Nat Geo editors?
So I will quote, who was it? Todd, I'm blanking on Todd's last name right now, who is a photo editor at National Geographic, and this is his answer, not mine. We'll find you. You won't find us. Like that's kind of like.
Please do not call.
Yeah. They will know you if they need to know you, I guess is how they put it. So yeah, I have no concept of how people get a foot in the door.
Yeah, I will say your work will do the top, no?
Yes, exactly.
I think my wanderlust is now stronger than ever. Todd James. Okay, Abby, the conversation will shut down any minute, but it's been nice to see you and interesting. I told you I'm not a journalist, so the questions were not going to be too intense or too deep. I don't think you'll be elevated to a better person after this. But I'm trying to, for the people who wants to learn more about photography, to understand a wider perspective of this craftsmanship and you know,